You could argue that this is the engine that the Tank 300 probably needed right from the start. This is the GWM Tank 300 now with turbo diesel power. This is an engine that first turned up in the Canon Alpha and Canon Utes. We've got a 2.4 litre turbo diesel engine here, but now it's in a four-wheel drive SUV from GWM. Let's take this for a drive and see how it goes.
Diesel power joins the GWM Tank 300 range in 2025, and it slots in price-wise between the existing turbo petrol and hybrid powertrain options. This diesel Tank 300 is priced from $47,990 drive away for the entry-level Lux variant, while top spec Ultra goes for $51,990 also drive away. But it's worth noting there are currently some deals on the Tank 300 running on GWM's website, so be sure to check those out. Standard equipment here includes twin 12.3 displays on the inside for infotainment and driver displays. There's also faux leather seat with electric adjustment, keyless entry with push button start, automatic wipers and LED lighting, plus a 360-degree camera. There's a 9-speaker sound system and a locking rear differential. Going up to Ultra gets you a front locking differential as well, with heated and ventilated front seat with Napa accents, wireless phone charging, a heated steering wheel, upgraded sound system, and even a massaging driver's seat. Now, there's a bunch of other things here as well worth noting, and for the full range of features of this Tank 300, be sure to head over to Drive.com.au to read our stories. The 2.4 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder diesel engine makes 135 kilowatts and 480 newton meters, and this runs through a 9-speed automatic transmission to all 4 wheels via a part-time 4-wheel drive system with low range. The 4-cylinder 2-litre turbo petrol engine with 162 kilowatts and 380 newton meters carries on, and that is the cheapest engine variant for the Tank 300 range. The hybrid carries on as well, and it stays the most expensive and the most powerful. You've got 255 kilowatts and 648 newton meters of combined outputs available. Although in this review, we are only driving the diesel Tank 300. Claimed fuel economy for the diesel-powered Tank 300 is 7.8 litres per 100 Ks, but on this initial short drive, we weren't able to get too close to that number. It was more like 9.5 litres per 100 on our initial test. But there is an increase in payload here, which is good news for four-wheel drivers and families alike. You've now got 600 kilos available, which is much better than the 397 kilos, a very small number, for the petrol-powered model. The brake towing capacity has gone up as well with this diesel model, going up to 3,000 kilos, which is an advantage over the 2.5 tons available for the other two powertrains. On the inside of the Tank 300, along with a big range of standard equipment, there is no change for the 2025 model range, even though it's worth noting there is a new interior treatment for this vehicle in China, and it's all carryover on the boxy outside as well. The only thing different for this diesel model is that 2.4T badging on the back.
Sticking a turbocharged diesel engine into the Tank 300 really is something of a no-brainer. And now, because GWM has this 2.4 litre turbo diesel engine with 480 newton meters, not bad, it makes a lot of sense. And this is going to be probably, GWM says, going to be the volume seller in the Tank 300 range. So you've got the petrol turbo, not a bad thing by the way, I do like that car, and also the more powerful hybrid. But this is a four-wheel drive vehicle. When you're buying four-wheel drive, you'd like to buy turbo diesel for driving range, torque, and many other reasons, towing capacity as well. Now, how does this thing drive? It's pretty good, mostly. There are a few changes here, which does make the car feel different than just being a Tank 300 with a diesel engine. There's increased payload here. We've got an increased towing capacity as well. And while we're unladen at the moment, you can definitely feel that there is much more stiffness in this vehicle in terms of the suspension, the way it goes over bumps, the way it goes over speed bumps and that sort of thing. The Tank 300 petrol is much more soft and wafting, really good for bump absorption and that sort of thing. This car does feel a little bit stiff and jiggly at times. You can't go over a speed bump with maybe a little bit too much speed because it does really sort of jolt into the cabin. So the ride quality isn't as good as a Tank 300 petrol. I haven't driven the hybrid myself, so I'm not going to comment on that, but the powertrain does have really good level of torque available, which is a nice combination. I think it's a vehicle that doesn't need to rev out to get moving. It just shoves along a little bit there, but just coming up to a roundabout here at the moment, there is a little bit of a delay in the throttle response at times. You press it down and you do have to really wait for that engine to come on board and develop a little bit of boost. It is a variable geometry turbo, but there is a delay there. Once you're rolling and you've got the pedal down, this thing moves along pretty well. It's good enough, I think. The 9-speed automatic is pretty good, but there is a bit of a throttle delay there. So we'll see how that goes off-road a little bit later. You might have to drive around that. Stay tuned for that. But first impressions of a Tank 300, it makes perfect sense having diesel power in a vehicle like this. It could be calibrated a little bit better, I think, through the throttle. And also, the ride quality does take a bit of a backward step thanks to having a bigger payload and bigger towing capacity. So now we've been off-road in this Tank 300, and before we get our hopes up too much, I've got to say that this initial test drive of the Tank 300 diesel has been relatively tame and short-lived so far. So we've been in low range. I'm in low range at the moment for a little bit, but even though we do have diff locks front and rear in this specification, we haven't really had to use them yet, which is a bit of a shame because I know from past experience we did have that long-term turbo petrol Tank 300, and that was a fantastic car to take off-road for many reasons. Diff locks, clearance, suspension, there's a lot of really good things going on with that car, but unfortunately I haven't really had the chance to stretch this thing's legs off-road just yet. But still, some feedback, and following on from talking about the throttle response on-road, it is a bit imperfect off-road as well. You'll notice that the throttle, the actual pedal travel is relatively short, and it doesn't take much of a push there to give you a pretty big push of torque, and then you sort of back off and the torque comes off, and it can feel a little bit jerky off-road for that reason. So you've got to be really precise with your throttle inputs off-road, especially when you're in low range. Now you can dial that down a little bit via the expert range of different driving modes there, but it does make a huge amount of difference, and it sort of is, I suppose, glossing over a problem that should have been correct from the start. Now, we also noticed that when you're in low range, this car does tend to hold on to gear ratios for a really long time. Normally, that's a very good thing. If you're driving in sand or something like that, you don't want random gear changes happening all the time, but this was almost holding on to things for a little bit too long at times. We were sort of revving the thing out at about 4,000 RPM going up a hill there, and it could have really gone with an easy gear change at times there. But anyway, that's what we've seen so far. I do know that this is a very capable vehicle off-road. It's got the panhard rod, live rear axle, it's got independent front suspension, good approach and departure angles, all those sorts of things are really well set up. We just haven't been able to test that out really thoroughly yet, but in the future we will be able to have a crack at that. Well, the wind's picking up here, and unfortunately we don't really have any more time to spend more off-roading time with this Tank 300, because I know that this would be quite a good vehicle in a fairly technical off-road setting, thanks to things like diff locks, good rear suspension and that sort of thing. But I think this 2.4 litre turbo diesel does make a lot of sense for a vehicle like this, especially now you've got an increased payload, a bit more towing capacity. This is something that could actually work for someone who wants to go a little bit longer range in terms of going off-road, camping and all of that sort of thing. This does make a bit more sense. Unfortunately, The powertrain calibration isn't perfect, the throttle's a bit touchy for my taste, and the gearbox does do some funny things off-road. And because we've got that increased payload, the ride quality compared to the turbo Tank 300 has gone down a notch or two in my opinion as well. But that's the price you pay, I think, for payload in a vehicle like this. But otherwise, Tank 300 with turbo diesel power, I do like it. Now, if you want to see the full review on this Tank 300 turbo diesel and see anything else, in fact, around the new car scene in Australia, head to Drive.com.au. And if you want to see our long-term review of a Tank 300 petrol, watch this video up here. It is a good one.